My name is Amelia, and I am 24 years old. The screaming had been going on for 5 minutes before my aunt finally put a placating hand on her daughter's arm, not to stop her, but to act as a theatrical prop in her grand performance. Of indignation, I am not asking, I am demanding that you park that pile of scrap metal somewhere else. My cousin Isabel shrieked, her voice echoing through the pristine living room. My friends are coming over. I will not be humiliated by having that rust bucket in my driveway. It looks like something a homeless person would live in, and frankly, I'm mortified that we're even related. I could feel the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, the burning shame that my aunt and uncle so clearly enjoyed seeing on my face. They sat on their pearl white sofa, my uncle looking proud, my aunt with a smirk that was meant to look like a concerned frown. They had orchestrated this, pushing Isabel to this point, validating her cruelty with their silent approval. The rest of the family just watched, their eyes full of that awful, familiar pity, the kind that makes you feel smaller than you already do. They saw a poor, pathetic girl being rightfully put in her place by her successful, beautiful cousin. What they didn't see was my father's hands on that steering wheel, or hear my mother's laughter in the passenger seat. That car isn't a status symbol. It's a time capsule. It's the last piece of my parents I have left, the one tangible thing that still smells faintly of my dad's cologne and integrity. They see rust, but I feel history. They see shame, but I feel love. And that is a currency my cousin has never understood. A language she has never cared to learn because she was born speaking only the dialect of price tags and prestige. Isabel, seeing my silence as weakness, moved in for the kill, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. Look, Amelia, I know things have been hard for you since, you know, but while you're clinging to the past, some of us are building a future. I'm a finalist for the Miller Foundation Legacy Scholarship. It's a full ride for people who are actually going somewhere in life. The words hung in the air, a final, perfect insult designed to highlight the vast chasm between our destinies. The Miller Foundation. My breath hitched, and a wild, hysterical laugh threatened to erupt from my chest. Oh, Isabel, you have no idea where you're going. You have no idea who is paving the road. That frozen smile on Isabel's face sent me right back to the week after my parents' funeral. The house was so quiet, filled with the scent of wilting sympathy flowers. My Aunt Sarah and Uncle Thomas sat me down at the big dining room table, their faces arranged in masks of deep concern, but their eyes were sharp, like wolves circling. They didn't offer hugs or tissues. They slid a folder across the polished wood and told me not to worry, that they would handle everything. They said the smartest thing to do was to sell my father's company, liquidate all the assets, and put the money in a trust they would manage for me. For my own good, of course. My uncle explained it to me like I was a child. He said my dad was a good man, but he was old-fashioned, too simple. He said the business world was tough, and that a grieving 19-year-old girl would be eaten alive. My aunt chimed in, saying that I could finally buy myself some nice things, a new car, maybe travel a bit. They weren't just suggesting it. They were telling me my future. They saw my inheritance not as my father's legacy, but as a misdelivered package they were meant to sign for. Their condescension was a poison, meant to paralyze me with self-doubt. Then there was Liam. He was just a junior analyst back then, a kid my dad had taken a chance on. He waited until my aunt and uncle left and found me crying in my dad's study. He didn't have all the answers, but he had loyalty. He simply said, "Your father built something special, Amelia. He believed in it, and he believed in you. Don't let them tell you what it's worth." That was it. No magic solution, just a flicker. A faith from someone who remembered my dad for who he truly was, not for the dollar signs he left behind. It was the first time I felt like I wasn't completely alone. That flicker of faith was enough. The next day, I told my aunt and uncle I was keeping the company. I was taking my father's seat on the board. The look on their faces wasn't disappointment, it was fury. It was the anger of thieves who had their hands slapped away from the prize. That was the day. Their war against me truly began. They started the whispers then, painting me as a foolish, sentimental girl running her father's legacy into the ground. They needed me to fail because my success would prove them wrong, not just about me, but about their own shallow values. And now, seeing Isabel's smug face, I realized this scholarship wasn't just another insult dot. It was meant to be the final nail in the coffin of poor, pathetic Amelia. For 2 weeks, I tried to push the memory of that afternoon away. I told myself it was just Isabel being Isabel. But then a call came from my cousin Mark, the quiet one who usually stays out of the drama. He sounded terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. He confessed that my Aunt Sarah had been systematically poisoning the well with our great Aunt Carol, the matriarch of the family. She was feeding her a steady diet of lies, painting a heartbreaking picture of me as a financial wreck, incapable of managing my own life, let alone any future inheritance. Carol was starting to believe her. Suddenly, every snide comment, every pitying look from the past 5 years clicked into place. It wasn't just random cruelty, it was a calculated campaign. My old car wasn't just a joke to them. It was Exhibit A in their case against me. My small apartment was Exhibit B. My decision to live simply, to honor my parents' values instead of flashing their money around, was being twisted into proof that I was incompetent. They were using my humility as a weapon to try and disinherit me, to cut me out of the family's future entirely. The betrayal was so much deeper than I could have ever imagined. The worst part was realizing they were succeeding. I thought back to my last call with Great Aunt Carol. She had been distant, asking strange questions about my job and if I was keeping my head above water. At the time, I thought it was just an old woman's loving concern. Now I could practically hear my aunt, Sarah's venom whispering in her ear. I felt a cold dread wash over me. They weren't just content with their own wealth. They were actively trying to tear down my security, piece by piece, all while smiling at me during holiday dinners. I hung up the phone with Mark, my hands shaking. This was no longer just about my feelings. This was sabotage. I called Liam and told him everything, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't offer an easy fix, he just listened, his silence a sign of his own simmering anger. He said, "They've underestimated you since day one, Amelia. They're so focused on the story they're telling, they can't imagine you might have a story of your own." Just as he said that, an email popped up on my laptop. It was from the director of the Miller Foundation. The subject line read, "Legacy Scholarship, finalists for review." My heart stopped. I opened the file, and there it was. The second name on the list, Isabel Davenport. The very thing they believed was their greatest weapon had just been handed directly to me. I stared at Isabel's name on the screen, the cursor blinking next to it like a tiny ticking bomb. The world outside my office window seemed to fade away. This scholarship wasn't just a prize she wanted. It was the entire centerpiece of her parents' story. It was their proof to Great Aunt Carol and the rest of the world that Isabel was the worthy one, the family's brilliant future, while I was the sad, stagnant past. They had no idea that the very stage they built to crown their princess was one I owned, and that the crown itself was mine to give. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. The breaking point came a week later at Great Aunt Carol's 80th birthday party. The whole family was there, and my aunt and uncle were in their element, circling Carol like planets around a sun. During the toast, Aunt Sarah raised her glass, her eyes glittering. She praised Isabel's recent accomplishments and her bright future before turning her gaze to me. And to Amelia, she said, her voice dripping with fake warmth, who reminds you us all that there's more to life than ambition, Dot. It's so admirable to be content with a simpler path. The room fell silent as everyone looked at me, their faces a mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment. It was a perfectly crafted insult, gift wrapped as a compliment. Later, Isabel found me by the cake table. The director of the Miller Foundation absolutely loved me, she whispered, her eyes alight with triumph. He said it was refreshing to meet a young woman with such clear, powerful goals. He practically told me the scholarship was mine. Hearing her quote Mr. Harrison, my employee, a man whose salary I signed off on back to me, was the most surreal and isolating moment of my life. I felt like a ghost in my own story, watching someone else narrate a twisted version of it while I was forced to stand by and say nothing. I couldn't take it anymore. I fled the party without saying goodbye, the fake laughter and clinking glasses chasing me out the door. I got into my dad's old Camry and just sat in the darkness of the parking garage, the tears I had been holding back finally streaming down my face. They were winning. Their lies were so powerful, they were starting to feel true. I felt small and powerless, like that 19-year-old girl in the dining room all over again. I pulled out my phone and called Liam, my voice cracking as I told him I was done. I can't fight this, Liam. I should just let her have it. Let them win. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. They aren't just trying to win, Amelia. They're trying to erase you. They're trying to erase your father's legacy. Are you going to let them? His words cut through my despair like a bolt of lightning. He was right. This wasn't a fight I could surrender from. It was a fight for my parents' memory. I ended the call, my tears drying on my face, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I opened the foundation file on my phone again. The war was over. The reckoning was about to begin. The next morning, I didn't drive to the small satellite office where I usually work. I drove downtown to the glass tower on the financial square. I took the private elevator to the penthouse floor, the doors opening into the quiet, sunlit headquarters of the Miller Foundation. This was my real office, the one my family knew nothing about. Mr. Harrison, the foundation's director, was waiting for me in the boardroom, a leather-bound folder on the table between us. He's a kind man in his 60s who worked with my father for years, and now he helps me carry on his legacy. He slid the folder towards me. As you'll see, your cousin is an exceptional student, he began, his tone professional. Her academic record is flawless. However, her essays raised some concerns during the final review. She writes extensively about her ambition for wealth and status, but very little about community or service. When I asked her about giving back in the interview, she called it a necessary component of brand management. Her words, not mine. I felt a hollow space open up in my chest. It was worse than I thought. She wasn't just arrogant. She was empty of the one thing that mattered. My mother's maiden name was Miller. I started the foundation in her honor, building it around the values she and my dad lived by: humility, integrity, and the quiet duty of lifting others up. The scholarship wasn't just a check. It was meant to be an investment in a person's character. I looked at the folder, at Isabel's confident, smiling headshot, and realized she had walked into the most important test of her life without even knowing it was happening. And in her own words, with her own philosophy, she had completely and utterly failed. Mr. Harrison saw the conflict on my face. Amelia, the choice is simple from my perspective, he said gently. The other two finalists are just as qualified academically, and their life goals align perfectly with the foundation's mission. We can simply send your cousin a polite letter of rejection. She will never know you were involved, No one will. He was offering me a silent, clean victory, a way to deliver the ultimate consequence without ever showing my hand. It was tempting. It was the safe thing to do. But as I sat there in the seat of my father's power, I realized the safe thing was no longer enough. A quiet rejection wouldn't teach her anything. It wouldn't change my aunt and uncle. It would just be a mystery they'd complain about forever. No, the lesson had to be clear and it had to be public. I closed the folder and looked Mr. Harrison in the eye. "She's going to get the scholarship," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "And I'm going to present it to her myself at the annual awards gala." It's time they finally met the founder. The first move in the reckoning wasn't a loud declaration. It was a quiet act of sabotage delivered by the mailman. I had the foundation send its most elegant invitations for the awards gala to my entire extended family. On each one, I attached a simple, handwritten note. "It would mean so much for you to be there to support Isabel. I have a feeling it's going to be a night she'll never forget." I knew the formal, expensive invitation arriving with my name on it would create a confusion they couldn't ignore. It was the first stone tossed into their calm, smug pond. Predictably, my phone rang, less than an hour after the invitations were delivered. It was Aunt Sarah, and her voice was tight with suspicion. "Amelia, what is this? What have you done?" she demanded without so much as a hello. "I hope you haven't done something foolish, like petition the foundation for a handout. It would be deeply humiliating for Isabel on her big night if you caused some kind of scene." Her mind was so trapped in her own narrative of my failure that she couldn't imagine any other reality. She thought I was the jester, not the queen. For the first time in my life, her words didn't sting. I felt a strange sense of calm as I listened to her veiled threats. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Aunt Sarah," I said, my voice even and polite. "I just want to be there to support my cousin." "You should all be there. It's important." My refusal to be flustered, my calm insistence clearly unnerved her. I could hear her sputtering as I told her I had to go and politely ended the call. Had taken back control, not by yelling, but by simply refusing to play my assigned part in her drama anymore. A family text chain, which I was still a part of, predictably exploded with whispers and worried emojis. My cousin Mark messaged me privately asking if I was okay. They were all convinced I was heading for a public breakdown. Let them think that. Let them build up their story of what was about to happen. Their arrogance was the foundation of my plan. They were so busy looking down on me that they never thought to look up and see the power I was holding. They were walking into a trap of their own making, blinded by their greed and prejudice. On the night of the gala, I didn't choose a new, expensive dress. I wore a simple, elegant black dress that had belonged to my mother. It felt like armor. As I got into my dad's old, reliable car, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The lies and the insults no longer mattered. Tonight was not about revenge. It was about truth. They were all expecting a tragedy, a final pathetic display from the family failure. They had no idea they were about to witness a resurrection. When I walked into the grand ballroom, I saw them holding court in the front row, a perfect portrait of success. My aunt and uncle looked on proudly as Isabel, radiant in a shimmering gown, accepted congratulations from distant relatives. They saw me slip into a seat in the back, and my Aunt Sarah gave me a tight, pitying smile, a final, silent warning not to embarrass them. They had no idea that their front row seats were for an execution, and they were about to witness their own. They thought they were watching the final act of my tragedy when they were really sitting in the splash zone of their own karma. The ceremony began, and eventually, Mr. Harrison stood at the podium. He spoke of legacy, integrity, and character. Then, with a warm smile, he announced the winner. This year's Miller Foundation Legacy Scholarship goes to a student of truly remarkable ambition, Miss Isabel Davenport. My family erupted. My uncle shot to his feet, clapping wildly. My aunt dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Isabel practically floated to the stage, beaming, and accepted the award, turning to look right at me with a triumphant, condescending smirk. It was her perfect moment, her ultimate victory. But then Mr. Dot Harrison held up a hand for silence. "And now," he said, his voice booming through the auditorium, "for the ceremonial signing of the scholarship check, we have a very special guest." For years, the founder of this foundation has chosen to remain anonymous. Tonight, she has decided to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairwoman and founder of the Miller Foundation, Ms. Amelia Miller. A single spotlight swung from the stage and landed on me. The entire room went dead silent. 1,000 faces turned to stare. Time seemed to warp as I stood up and began to walk toward the stage. I didn't look at the confused faces of the crowd. I only watched my family. I saw my uncle's hands freeze mid-clap. I saw my aunt's jaw drop, her mask of pride shattering into a million pieces. And I saw Isabel. Her perfect smile dissolved, her face draining of all color until she was as white as a ghost. The smug victor was gone, replaced by a terrified girl who finally understood that the game was real and that she had just lost in the most public way imaginable. I reached the stage and stood beside a trembling Isabel. I was no longer the sad, pitiful cousin in the old car. I was the beginning and end of her dream. I calmly picked up the pen. All the power, all the secrets, all the lies, all converged into that one single moment. I looked my cousin directly in the eye, the girl who had called me a charity case, and I prepared to sign the biggest check she had ever seen. The world had turned completely upside down, and I was the one who had flipped it.